Chapter 1. The Beginning You Didn't Know You Needed. Healing begins quietly, almost secretly. It slips into your life in ways you barely notice. A sudden ache in your chest you can't ignore anymore. A familiar pattern repeating until you're too exhausted to pretend it doesn't hurt. A feeling that something deep in you wants to change, even though you're terrified of what that change might require. Healing doesn't show up with gentle timing or a polite introduction. It arrives like truth, knocking on a door you've been afraid to open. There's a part of you that has been carrying pain for so long, you started calling it personality. You adapted. You learned to survive. You learned to function with wounds you never admitted were real. And somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that pretending not to feel was the same as not hurting. But buried pain doesn't die, it grows. It waits. It shapes you in ways you don't see until your life starts repeating itself, and you realize the common denominator has always been the hurt you never allowed yourself to face. You weren't weak for avoiding it. You were young. You were overwhelmed. You were unprotected. You were trying to keep yourself together when everything around you felt like it was falling apart. You didn't have the tools back then. You barely had the language. You did the best you could with what you had. And now, the version of you who survived is meeting the version of you who is ready to actually heal. It feels confusing at first. This urge to revisit things you swore you had forgotten. Old memories surface. Old emotions return. Things that never bothered you suddenly sting. You catch yourself reacting too strongly, shutting down, pulling back, or getting triggered by situations that don't match the intensity of your response. That's not you being dramatic. That's your body, remembering what your mind tried to bury. Pain lives in the mind, but it stores itself in the body, waiting for safety to finally release itself. This is the moment healing begins. The moment you stop shaming yourself for your reactions and start asking where they came from. The moment you stop calling yourself too sensitive and recognize that you were never given space to feel anything at all. The moment you stop thinking something is wrong with you and realize something happened to you. Healing begins when you face the truth without judgment. And the truth is this: you're not broken. You're carrying pieces of a story you never got to finish. You're holding emotions you weren't taught how to process. You're still stitching yourself back together from wounds you never acknowledged. Healing isn't pretty because it asks you to go backward before you can move forward. It asks you to sit in feelings you avoided for years. It asks you to grieve the parts of you that had to be strong before they were ready. It asks you to release identities you built to survive. But here's what nobody tells you. Healing also reveals the strength you didn't know you had. When you stop pretending, you start understanding. When you stop suppressing, you start releasing. When you stop running, you finally start returning to yourself. Your emotions become less terrifying. Your triggers become teachers. Your pain becomes a map, showing you where you lost yourself and how to find your way back. You don't have to rush. You don't have to force anything. You don't have to heal everything at once. Healing is not a race, it's a reunion. A slow, gentle, sometimes messy return to the parts of you that were left behind. Some days you'll feel strong. Some days you'll feel broken. Some days you'll want to hide from everything you're feeling. None of that means you're failing. It means you're unfolding. This chapter of your life may not feel beautiful, but it is necessary. You're learning to hold your own heart with the softness you never received. You're learning to listen to your pain instead of escaping it. You're learning that healing isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest, being present, being willing, being brave enough to face yourself without running. Healing isn't pretty, but neither is staying broken. And today, without even realizing it, you chose healing. Chapter 2. The pain you carry has been talking to you. There's a moment in your healing journey where you finally realize the hurt you thought you hid so well has been speaking for you louder than your own voice. Not in obvious ways, not in ways other people could easily point out, but in subtle choices, patterns, and reactions that keep repeating until you can't pretend it's coincidence anymore. Your pain has been showing up in the way you second-guess yourself, in the way you brace for disappointment, even when things are going well, in the way you give too much just to feel needed, in the way you apologize before you've even done anything wrong, in the way you stay quiet to keep the peace, in the way you pull back the moment you feel too seen, in the way you choose people who feel familiar instead of people who feel safe. You think these are personality traits, but they're not. They're emotional echoes, memories your body never got to release, instincts formed to protect you from pain you were never allowed to process. You're not reacting to the present, you're reacting to the past, replaying itself inside your nervous system. And it's not your fault. When you're forced to move forward without healing, your mind finds ways to protect you. It builds walls, habits, survival patterns. It prepares for hurt, even when no one is hurting you. It expects abandonment even when someone is trying to love you. It flinches at kindness because kindness once led to disappointment. It gets anxious when things feel peaceful because peace once came before chaos. Your pain has been doing its best to keep you safe, but in the process, it has also kept you small. Healing begins when you recognize the messages your hurt is sending. Not to shame yourself, but to understand yourself. Not to control the emotion, but to listen to it. Because every reaction, every trigger, every emotional spike is trying to tell you something you were never given space to feel. You don't get angry out of nowhere. You don't shut down for no reason. You don't overthink because you're dramatic. You don't distance yourself because you don't care. There is always a reason, and that reason deserves compassion, not judgment. People around you may not notice the shift, but you feel it. The tug inside your chest, the tightness in your throat, the heaviness behind your eyes. That quiet sensation that something old is waking up. Something you tried to bury, something you hoped time would erase. Time doesn't heal what you refuse to look at. Time only hides it. And healing requires more from you than silence. It requires presence. It requires honesty. It requires curiosity instead of self-blame. Ask yourself gently, what part of me is hurting right now? Where have I felt this before? What is this emotion trying to protect me from? You'll be surprised by how clearly your pain answers when you stop avoiding it. You'll realize that your breakdowns weren't weakness, they were signals. Your outbursts weren't immaturity, they were reminders that something inside you needed attention. Your patterns weren't failures, they were clues. Your pain has been trying to guide you back to yourself. And the more you listen, the more you'll realize that healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about freeing yourself from the version of you who had to survive it. You're learning to interpret your reactions instead of shaming them. You're learning to comfort your younger self instead of silencing her. You're learning that your emotions aren't problems, they're messages, and every message brings you closer to understanding the wound beneath the behavior. Healing isn't pretty, because honesty rarely is. But it's honest that sets you free. And you're finally ready to hear what your pain has been trying to say all along. Chapter 3. Healing starts when you stop pretending you're okay. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep. It comes from pretending you're fine when you're unraveling inside. From smiling through memories that still ache. From acting strong because you don't know how to be anything else. From carrying pain so quietly that even the people closest to you have no idea you're drowning. You learned early how to hold yourself together, how to fix your voice so it doesn't shake, how to look calm even when your heart is racing, how to hide disappointment before anyone notices it, how to swallow emotions before they have the chance to escape. You became good at coping. Too good. Good enough that nobody questioned you. Good enough that people relied on you without ever asking if you were tired. Good enough that your own pain started believing it didn't deserve attention. But there is a cost to being strong for too long. Eventually you start confusing numbness with peace, disconnection with healing, functioning with being okay, avoidance with growth. Healing begins the moment you realize strength isn't about holding everything in. It's about having the courage to let something out. You don't have to collapse to be hurting. You don't have to fall apart to justify your emotions. You don't need visible scars to prove something wounded you. Pain doesn't always look loud. Most of the time, it looks exactly like you. Smiling, working, helping, showing up, trying your best, while quietly carrying everything you've never said out loud. It's not that you chose silence, it's that silence was the only option you had for a long time. Expressing your hurt didn't feel safe. Opening up didn't feel welcomed. Being vulnerable didn't feel possible. So your heart learned to hide. Your voice learned to shrink. Your emotions learned to wait. And they've been waiting for you ever since. Healing begins when you give yourself permission to stop performing the version of you that was created for survival. The version who never asked for help. The version who felt responsible for holding everything together. The version who believed feeling deeply made you weak. The version who apologized for having needs. The version who stayed quiet to keep everything peaceful on the outside. That version of you deserves compassion because they got you through so much, but they don't have to lead anymore. You're allowed to be more honest now. You're allowed to feel without justifying it. You're allowed to cry without hiding it. You're allowed to say, "That hurt me," without guilt. You're allowed to let people see the cracks you once tried so hard to cover. Healing is not about being dramatic. Healing is about being real. About giving your inner world the attention you've denied it for years. About letting yourself finally exhale after holding your breath emotionally for far too long. It's messy. It's uncomfortable. It exposes everything you suppressed. It reveals the truth you tried to outrun. It forces you to admit, "I haven't been okay for a long time." But that confession is not weakness. It's freedom. It opens your heart. It softens your defenses. It connects you with yourself again. Because healing doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be present. To stop pretending. To stop hiding. To stop carrying your hurt alone. You don't have to be okay to deserve care. You don't have to be healed to deserve love. You don't have to be strong to deserve rest. This chapter of your life is about finally taking off the emotional armor you never wanted to wear in the first place. And for the first time in a long time, letting yourself simply be human. Chapter 4. You can't heal in the same place that hurt you. There comes a point in your healing where you finally understand this. You can't grow in the environments that broke you. You can't rise in the spaces that taught you to shrink. You can't find peace in the same rooms where your spirit learned to brace for impact. And you can't become whole while returning to the people who benefit from you staying wounded. Healing asks you to make choices your past self wasn't strong enough to make. The kind of choices that feel like loss at first, but become liberation later. Choices that feel uncomfortable because your body is used to familiar pain, not healthy peace. Choices that separate you from what you once clung to when you didn't know better. There is a reason you feel anxious when you go back to certain places. A reason your chest tightens around certain people. A reason your mind spirals in the environments where you were ignored, dismissed, overlooked, or silenced. Your body remembers everything your mind tried to forget, and sometimes the only way to heal is to stop returning to the scenes of your emotional crimes. It doesn't mean you're holding grudges. It doesn't mean you're weak or scared or unforgiving. It means you're finally listening to the version of you who had to survive in those moments. It means you're honoring your nervous system instead of abandoning yourself again and again. It means you're choosing you, maybe for the first time. People will call you distant. People will say you've changed. People will make you feel guilty for outgrowing dynamics that were never meant to be permanent. But healing isn't about keeping other people comfortable. Healing is about building a life that doesn't require you to betray yourself to be loved. You're allowed to walk away from what no longer feels safe. You're allowed to say, "This environment isn't healthy for me anymore." You're allowed to outgrow relationships that stayed the same while you didn't. You're allowed to step back from people who only knew how to love the unhealed version of you. You're allowed to leave spaces where you learn to make yourself smaller just to belong. Healing requires space. Space to breathe. Space to feel. Space to think. Space to separate who you are becoming from the person you had to be just to survive. And sometimes that means stepping away from everything that once felt like home, because home was built on survival, not peace. There is a grief that comes with this part of the journey, a sadness you can't explain, a loneliness you didn't expect, a fear of the unknown that makes you wonder if you're doing the right thing. But growth always feels like loss when you're shedding pieces of yourself you outgrew. You're not leaving people behind. You're leaving versions of yourself behind, versions that learned how to accept less endure more, and stay silent to avoid conflict. Versions that didn't know boundaries. Versions that didn't know their worth. Versions that loved from fear instead of fullness. Healing asks you to release those identities, to detach from the comfort of the familiar, to trust that your future is worth the unsettling process of change. Because every time you choose to stay somewhere that hurt you, you tell your heart it doesn't deserve better. And every time you choose to walk away, you teach it the exact opposite. You don't heal by returning to what broke you. You heal by creating a life where your spirit no longer has to armor itself just to exist. You're not running away. You're rising. And even though rising feels terrifying, empty, and lonely at first, it's also the first time in a long time you're choosing yourself. Chapter 5: Healing will ask you to break your own heart. There's a part of healing nobody warns you about. Sometimes becoming whole requires you to break your own heart on purpose, not because you want to, but because clinging to certain people, habits, memories, and versions of yourself hurts more than letting them go. Healing doesn't just ask you to walk away from the things that harmed you, it asks you to walk away from the things that made you feel safe while harming you. It asks you to release the people you loved, even when loving them meant abandoning yourself. It asks you to confront the truth that some bonds felt like home only because chaos was the first home you ever knew. You don't just let go of people, you let go of illusions. You don't just end cycles, you end fantasies. You don't just outgrow relationships, you outgrow the version of yourself who tolerated them. And that hurts. It hurts because you cared. It hurts because you hoped. It hurts because you stayed longer than you should have, holding on to potential instead of reality. It hurts because you gave parts of yourself you never learned to give back to you. Healing isn't the soft, glowing, peaceful journey the world romanticizes. It's honest. It's raw. It's cruel before it's gentle. It cracks you open in places you spent years patching together with denial and distraction. It forces you to see the truth without the filters you once used to survive. The truth that some people cared for you in ways they understood, not in ways you needed. The truth that you were loyal to versions of love that weren't loyal to your spirit. The truth that you kept trying to be the glue in relationships that were never meant to hold you. The truth that your heart confused familiarity with safety, even when familiarity was just repetition of pain. There's a moment in healing where you sit alone with the realization that letting go is not rejection, it's protection. Protection from the emotional recycling of wounds that never heal. Protection from relationships that turn your softness into armor. Protection from environments that shrink your potential. Protection from patterns you inherited but do not have to repeat. It hurts because you're finally choosing yourself in a way that feels unfamiliar. It hurts because abandoning what hurt you feels like abandoning a part of your identity. It hurts because walking away forces you to meet the version of you who existed beneath all that pain, and meeting her is both beautiful and terrifying. But there's a peace that grows in the cracks of that heartbreak, a quiet strength, a steady clarity, a sense of self you didn't even realize you lost, a softness returning to places that hardened out of necessity, a whisper inside you saying, "This time, we're doing it differently." Your heart breaks not from being unloved, but from realizing how little love you gave yourself while trying to save everything else. And that heartbreak, the honest one, the cleansing one, is the beginning of real healing, because now you're learning to love without abandoning yourself, to give without losing yourself, to hope without delusion, to choose with discernment, to stay where your heart is nurtured, not drained, to protect your peace like it's a living thing because it is. Healing asks you to break your own heart only so it can rebuild in a shape that finally fits who you're becoming. Not the version you performed to survive. Not the version other people depended on. Not the version shaped by wounds you never acknowledged. But the version who chooses truth, who chooses clarity, who chooses boundaries, who chooses peace even when it feels lonely, who chooses growth even when it feels scary, who chooses herself even when it feels unfamiliar. Sometimes, healing hurts more than staying broken until the day it doesn't. Until the day you wake up and realize the pain you felt was the last time you'd ever feel that version of heartbreak again. You broke your own heart to save your future. And that's the most powerful love you will ever give yourself. Chapter 6. The patterns you repeat are trying to tell you something. Healing gets real when you start noticing your patterns, the people you're drawn to, the situations you find yourself in again, the moments you say, "How did I end up here?" again. Those aren't coincidences, they're echoes. Echoes of wounds unresolved, boundaries unlearned, truths unspoken. Echoes of versions of you who didn't know they deserved better. Patterns don't repeat because you're broken. Patterns repeat because something inside you is asking to be understood. You're not choosing the same type of heartbreak because you want pain, you're choosing what feels familiar. You're not falling into unhealthy connections because you don't know any better. You're falling because your heart still thinks chaos is normal. You're not overgiving because you're too kind. You're overgiving because you once learned love had to be earned. Your patterns are not failures. They're communication. Every time you ignore your intuition, it gets louder the next time. Every time you silence your needs, your body tightens a little more. Every time you pretend something doesn't hurt, your heart finds new ways to remind you it does. Healing asks you to stop judging the pattern and start understanding the message beneath it. Why do I choose people who make me question myself? Why do I feel unsafe when someone actually treats me well? Why do I push away what feels healthy? Why do I rush toward what drains me? Why do I apologize for existing? Why do I shrink around people I want to impress? Why do I give chances to people who've already shown me their limits? These questions aren't meant to punish you, they're portals. Every answer you uncover brings you closer to the wound beneath the pattern. Some patterns come from fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. Some patterns come from childhood, the unresolved places where you learned how to survive. Some patterns come from pain, the heartbreaks you never got to heal from. Some patterns come from silence, the emotions you pushed down so deep they learned how to speak through your choices instead. When you realize a pattern is repeating, it's not the universe testing you, it's the universe trying to free you. And freedom begins with honesty. Honesty about who you're choosing and why. Honesty about how you feel and what you need. Honesty about the version of you that's still making decisions out of fear instead of self-worth. You can't heal what you won't acknowledge, and you can't break a pattern you're still calling habit. Patterns lose their power the moment you stop reacting and start recognizing. You start noticing the shift. The things you used to tolerate now irritate your spirit. The people you once chased now feel heavy. The conversations you entertained now feel draining. The behaviors you excused now feel unacceptable. Your body rejects what your mind used to rationalize. That's growth. The version of you who once tolerated certain treatment can't even breathe in those same spaces now, and that isn't attitude, that's evolution. As you heal, your patterns don't disappear overnight, but you stop participating in the ones that break you. You stop giving your heart to people who don't know how to hold it. You stop lowering yourself for connections that were never meant to rise with you. You stop negotiating with the pain you're finally ready to release. Healing isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming aware. It's about choosing differently even before you feel fully healed. It's about interrupting the pattern long enough to create a new possibility. One day you look at your life and realize something beautiful. The things that once triggered you now teach you. The people who once drained you can no longer access you. And the patterns that once controlled you no longer define you. Because you listened, you learned, you healed the part of you that kept repeating the cycle. And now, you're not repeating anymore. You're becoming. Chapter 7. Healing will feel lonely before it feels liberating. There's a part of the healing journey no one prepares you for. The loneliness that comes when you finally start choosing yourself. It hits quietly at first. A shift in your spirit. A distance growing between you and people you once clung to. A discomfort in spaces you used to tolerate. A feeling that your old life doesn't fit anymore, but your new life hasn't fully arrived. It's strange, almost jarring the way healing pulls you into a place where you don't fully belong to who you were, but you're not yet grounded in who you're becoming. You're in the in-between, a transition zone, a spiritual waiting room where everything feels unfamiliar and nothing feels stable. This loneliness isn't punishment, it's preparation. When you stop accepting what wounds you, you naturally step away from the environments where your unhealed self once felt comfortable. When you stop settling, you naturally outgrow the relationships that required you to shrink. When you stop abandoning yourself, you naturally detach from the people who depended on your lack of boundaries to access you. Growth creates space. And at first, that space feels empty. You're no longer entertained by the chaos you once mistook for excitement. You're no longer drawn to the emotionally unavailable people you once tried to fix. You're no longer softened by apologies that come with no changed behavior. You're no longer impressed by connections that don't nourish your spirit. And because of that, your life gets quieter, your circle gets smaller, your days feel different, your heart feels exposed, your routine feels unfamiliar. You start wondering if you're doing something wrong, if you're isolating yourself too much, if you're becoming too guarded, if healing is hurting more than helping. But the truth is this: you're not losing anything meaningful, you're losing what kept you from meaning. This is the chapter where your soul detoxes from old attachments. People you once loved become people you only learned from. Places you once escaped to become places you can't breathe in anymore. Habits you once relied on suddenly feel heavy. Conversations you once engaged in now feel shallow. Pieces of you once protected now feel unnecessary. It's not loneliness, it's alignment. You're meeting yourself again, without the noise, without the pressure, without the distractions that kept you from hearing your own voice. This is the season where you rebuild your identity without the influence of anyone else. You learn what peace actually feels like. You learn what real love looks like. You learn what loyalty to yourself requires. You learn what your soul has been starving for. You learn that your worth never depended on anyone's presence, only your own. You'll miss people who weren't good for you. You'll crave cycles you outgrew. You'll feel pulled toward old patterns because they're familiar. You'll mistake discomfort for loneliness and loneliness for wrongness. But listen closely. You're not alone. You're transitioning. You're not lonely. You're clearing space. You're not abandoned. You're protected. You're not failing. You're evolving. The loneliness you're feeling is simply the quiet that comes before abundance, before alignment, before the friendships that feed your spirit, before the love that meets you where you are, before the opportunities that match your new identity, before the life that grows from choosing yourself again and again. This chapter of your healing feels empty, but the emptiness is where your new life begins. One day, you'll look back at this lonely season and realize it was actually the moment you became whole. Chapter 8. You don't heal by punishing yourself. Healing gets delayed not because you're incapable, but because somewhere along the way, you learn to blame yourself for the pain you went through. You learned to think, if I had been different, it wouldn't have happened. You learned to believe you were too much, or not enough, or somehow responsible for the way others treated you. You learned to measure your worth by how well you carried things that were never yours to hold. But here's the quiet truth many people spend their whole lives avoiding. You can't heal while fighting yourself. You can't grow while shaming the parts of you that were just trying to survive. You can't move forward when you're still punishing yourself for moments you didn't understand, choices you made from fear, or chapters you walked through without guidance. Forgiveness isn't just something you give to other people, it's something you owe to yourself. You owe yourself forgiveness for the things you didn't know back then, for the times you stayed too long because leaving felt impossible, for the moments you accepted less because you didn't yet believe you deserved more, for the love you poured into people who didn't know how to hold it, for the red flags you ignored because your heart was louder than your fear, for the ways you abandoned yourself while trying to be chosen by someone else. You didn't fail. You learned, and learning is messy. Healing begins when you stop replaying your past like a punishment and start viewing it as information, not evidence of your flaws, not proof of your weakness, just information showing you what you needed, what hurt you, what shaped you, and what you're finally ready to release. Your younger self deserves compassion, not criticism. She did what she could with the tools she had. She fought battles you still carry in your shoulders. She protected you with instincts she created out of necessity, not wisdom. She survived things she never should have had to endure. and she kept you alive long enough for you to reach the version of yourself who can actually heal. You don't heal by shaming her. You heal by holding her, by understanding her, by saying, "Thank you. I'll take it from here." Healing asks you to stop treating yourself like the villain in your own story. You weren't the cause of the pain, you were the one navigating it. You weren't the problem, you were the one stuck inside the problem trying to find a way out. You weren't weak, you were tired. You weren't broken, you were overwhelmed. You weren't unworthy, you were unprotected. This is the chapter where you stop carrying blame that was never yours, where you stop dragging guilt into every new beginning, where you stop expecting yourself to heal perfectly, where you stop demanding emotional strength from a heart that's still bruised. You're allowed to be gentle with yourself. You're allowed to take your time. You're allowed to not have it all figured out. You're allowed to be in progress, not perfection. You're allowed to grow slowly without rushing your own evolution. There is no timeline for healing, no deadline. No should be over it by now. Your journey is not late, it's unfolding exactly when you're ready. And right now, you're ready for something you weren't ready for before. The kind of healing that doesn't come from force, pressure, or self-criticism, but from compassion. You've punished yourself long enough. You've carried the weight long enough. You've blamed yourself long enough. This is the moment you put the weight down. This is the moment you soften. This is the moment you forgive. Not because the past disappears, but because you finally see yourself clearly. You didn't deserve what happened. You didn't cause it. And you don't have to keep suffering from it. Healing isn't pretty, but neither is staying broken. And right now, you're choosing the version of you who doesn't break herself to make sense of the past anymore. Chapter 9. Your boundaries are proof you finally love yourself. There comes a point in your healing where your spirit gets tired. Tired of explaining itself. Tired of shrinking to keep the peace. Tired of saying yes when everything inside you is screaming no. Tired of being available to everyone except yourself. Tired of carrying the emotional weight of relationships that would collapse if you stopped holding them up. This exhaustion becomes a turning point the moment you realize that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you finally learned how to close. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about keeping yourself whole. At first, setting them feels wrong, a little selfish, a little harsh, a little unfamiliar, because for years, you were conditioned to believe that love meant access, that care meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant carrying more than your share, that compassion meant allowing things that slowly drained you. You weren't taught boundaries, you were taught endurance. But endurance isn't affection, it's survival. And survival stops being admirable once you realize it's costing you your peace. The people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will be the first to call you difficult for finally having them. They'll call you distant because you stopped overextending, cold because you stopped explaining, selfish because you stopped prioritizing their comfort over your capacity, changed because you stopped being convenient. But that's okay. The people who truly value you will adjust. They will respect the new limits. They will honor your space. They will love you without needing you to abandon yourself in the process. Here's the quiet truth. You weren't hard. To love you were too easy to use. You weren't too much, you were giving too much to the wrong people. You weren't cold, you were exhausted. You weren't distant, you were healing. Boundaries teach people how to treat you, but more importantly, they teach you how to treat yourself. Your boundaries say, I don't have to break myself to be loved. I don't have to tolerate discomfort to keep a connection. I don't have to stay silent to avoid conflict. I don't have to hold the emotional weight for two people. I don't have to apologize for prioritizing my peace. And the more you practice them, the more you realize how many of your relationships depended on your lack of them. Healing will expose every place you gave too much, every place you were overlooked, every place your kindness was stretched thin, every place you confused tolerance with loyalty, every place you stayed because you were afraid leaving meant losing your worth. But boundaries don't take love away, they filter it. They remove the people who only love the unhealed you. They reveal the people who never intended to meet you halfway. They protect the spaces your heart is finally learning to honor. They keep your spirit from returning to cycles you work too hard to escape. And as you heal, something beautiful happens. You start feeling safe inside yourself again. Safe to say no. Safe to ask for what you need. Safe to choose what aligns. Safe to walk away from what doesn't. Safe to disappoint others rather than betray your own soul. This is the version of you that doesn't apologize for existing. The version that doesn't negotiate her own worth. The version that doesn't shrink for approval. The version that doesn't abandon herself for acceptance. This version of you doesn't love harder, she loves smarter. With clarity, with standards, with self-respect wrapped around her spirit like armor she crafted herself. Healing isn't pretty, but neither is staying broken. And boundaries are the bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. When you set them, you're not losing people. You're losing the version of yourself who thought she had to be everything to everyone just to be enough. And that loss is freedom. Chapter 10. You can't become who you're meant to be while holding on to who you were. There's a moment in your healing where you suddenly feel split in two, a version of you fighting to grow, and another version fighting just as hard to stay the same. The old you isn't bad, she's just scared. She's familiar, she's comfortable, she's predictable. She knows how to survive, and she's terrified of anything that asks her to do more than that. But growth doesn't negotiate. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't ask permission from the parts of you that are afraid. Growth arrives the moment your spirit can't tolerate who you're not anymore, and that moment feels like an unraveling, like losing parts of yourself you thought were permanent, like stepping out of clothes you've worn for so long they became your identity. Like watching your old coping mechanisms crumble in your hands while your new ones haven't formed yet. You're not falling apart, you're shedding. You're not confused, you're transitioning. You're not lost, you're outgrowing the path you've already mastered. But letting go doesn't always feel peaceful. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like fear. Sometimes it feels like emptiness. Sometimes it feels like betrayal not of others, but of the version of you who kept going when life gave you no other choice. That old version deserves compassion, not rejection. She carried you through heartbreak. She smiled through situations that would have broken someone else. She showed up even when she was exhausted. She held everything together when no one held her. She protected you, even if her protection came with patterns that hurt you later. But healing asks you to thank her and then release her. Not because she was wrong, but because she wasn't meant to lead forever. The beliefs that once kept you safe will suffocate you if you cling to them too long. The walls that once protected you will isolate you if you never put them down. The expectations you created to survive will restrict you if you treat them as destiny. You cannot become who you're meant to be while holding on to the identity you built from pain. So healing asks you to loosen your grip, to stop clinging to versions of yourself that no longer match your soul, to stop performing the character you created in moments you didn't feel safe, to stop shrinking yourself to fit stories that were never yours to begin with. This chapter is uncomfortable because it demands honesty. Honesty about the patterns you keep because they feel familiar. Honesty about the people you stay connected to because you're afraid of being alone. Honesty about the dreams you pretend you don't want because you fear failure. Honesty about the walls you won't let down because vulnerability still feels like danger. But the truth is simple. You cannot carry your future with the hands you built in your past. You have to grow new ones. Hands that can hold joy without guilt. Hands that can hold love without fear. Hands that can hold boundaries without shaking. Hands that can hold your own heart without apologizing for its weight. Becoming requires releasing. Releasing the urge to prove yourself. Releasing the need for validation. Releasing the fear of disappointing others. Releasing the instinct to stay small so you don't intimidate anyone. Releasing the belief that you have to earn what you deserve. Releasing the idea that healing has to be graceful or pretty. Letting go is an act of courage, not cruelty. You're not abandoning your past, you're honoring it by refusing to repeat it. You're not betraying your old self, you're freeing her. You're not losing who you were, you're making room for who you're becoming. And who you're becoming? She's stronger, softer, smarter, more intentional, more aware, more open, more aligned, more you than you've ever been. You don't evolve by clinging. You evolve by releasing. And right now, with every truth you face and every layer you shed, you're stepping closer to the version of you who finally feels like home. Chapter 11. The moment you realize you're not who you used to be. There's a quiet shift in healing that sneaks up on you. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't explode into your life. It doesn't arrive with celebration or clarity. It shows up as a moment soft, subtle, unexpected, where you realize you've changed. It might happen on an ordinary day. You're minding your business, living your life, doing something simple, and suddenly it hits you. You're reacting differently, thinking differently, choosing differently, protecting yourself differently, loving yourself differently. You don't chase the things you used to crave. You don't settle for the attention you once begged for. You don't tolerate the disrespect you once explained away. You don't break yourself to keep relationships alive. You don't abandon your own needs to earn a place in someone else's life. You've grown, quietly, slowly, without applause, without permission. Healing didn't make you loud. It made you grounded. You start noticing you don't feel the same pull toward chaos. Drama doesn't spark your adrenaline anymore. Inconsistency doesn't confuse you anymore. Manipulation doesn't guilt you anymore. Emotional breadcrumbs don't interest you anymore. You don't fight for people to stay. You don't convince anyone to choose you. You don't negotiate your worth in conversations where love is conditional. You don't twist yourself into versions you don't recognize just to feel accepted. For the first time, peace feels more familiar than pain. You catch yourself setting boundaries without shaking. You say no without explaining. You walk away without apologizing. You choose silence instead of reacting. You choose space instead of forcing connection. You choose yourself without guilt. And it feels strange, almost foreign, because you've outgrown the version of you who once thought self-sacrifice was a requirement for love. There's a grief that comes with this growth, a gentle mourning of the person you used to be, the girl who tried so hard, the girl who loved too deeply without protecting herself, the girl who accepted half love because she didn't believe she deserved more, the girl who stayed loyal to people who didn't show up for her. You honor her, but you don't miss her. Not because she was weak, but because she was unprotected. You look back at old memories and no longer feel the urge to return. You read old messages and feel nothing but clarity. You revisit old wounds and feel compassion instead of collapse. Your heart feels steadier. Your mind feels clearer. Your spirit feels lighter. Your body feels safer. You can sit with discomfort without falling apart. You can unpack emotions without drowning in them. You can communicate your needs without shaking. You can stand up for yourself without feeling cruel. This is the moment healing clicks into place, not when everything is perfect, but when you stop being controlled by the things that once destroyed you. You realize you don't think the same. You don't break the same. You don't fear the same. You don't love the same. You don't lose yourself the same. You've changed in ways you didn't see happening, and now the evidence is in front of you. It's in the way you walk away from what no longer feels aligned. It's in the way you don't force conversations that feel heavy. It's in the way you recognize red flags without trying to repaint them. It's in the way you trust your intuition without needing confirmation. It's in the way you finally choose peace over potential. You're not who you used to be, and thank God for that. You're softer but stronger, wiser but gentler, calmer but more powerful, boundaried but still open-hearted, grounded but still capable of love. You didn't become bitter, you became discerning. You didn't become cold, you became clear. You didn't become distant, you became self-respecting. This chapter marks the shift, the moment you stop trying to save the old you and start stepping into the woman you were always meant to become. Chapter 12. Becoming the version of you who never settles again. There comes a point in your healing where something inside you clicks into place, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of a soul that finally remembers its worth. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't require perfection. It just arrives, like a shift in the air, a change in the light, a moment where you feel different without trying to be. This is the moment you stop settling. Not because you're bitter, not because you're guarded, Not because you're scared of being hurt again, but because you finally learned what your heart costs, and you refuse to discount it ever again. Settling used to feel easier than being alone. Settling used to feel safer than choosing yourself. Settling used to feel familiar because love, for you, was always something you had to earn, chase, or fight for. Settling became a habit, a quiet surrender disguised as patience, loyalty, and hope. But healing changes the way you see yourself. It changes the way you love. It changes the way you allow others to treat you. And suddenly, the crumbs you once accepted feel insulting. The bare minimum feels empty. The inconsistencies feel loud. The apologies without actions feel meaningless. The connections that require your self-abandonment feel impossible to maintain. You wake up one day and realize the version of you who accepted less was surviving, not living. And you're done surviving. You want the kind of life that doesn't require you to shrink. You want the kind of love that doesn't punish you for having needs. You want the kind of peace that doesn't depend on someone else's mood. You want the kind of happiness that doesn't collapse when someone withdraws their affection. You want the kind of future that actually includes you, not the watered-down version of you you've been performing. This is the chapter where you step into alignment, where you choose with clarity instead of fear, where you walk away the first time something feels wrong instead of waiting for proof, where you stop arguing your worth in rooms that can barely hold your presence, where you stop trying to convince people to see you, love you, respect you, or choose you. You're done proving yourself. You're done begging for connection. You're done tolerating inconsistency. You're done settling for almost love, half effort, low energy, and people who only show up when it's convenient. You don't chase anymore, you attract. You don't explain anymore, you embody. You don't settle anymore, you select. You don't fear being alone, you fear abandoning yourself again. Because the healed version of you doesn't negotiate with anything that threatens her peace. She doesn't cling to what's leaving. She doesn't romanticize what hurts. She doesn't go back to what broke her. She doesn't lower her standards to be understood. She doesn't dim her light to make someone else comfortable. She knows better now. She knows herself now. She knows what love feels like when it's real. She knows what alignment feels like when it's mutual. She knows what peace feels like when it's stable. And most importantly, she knows she deserves all of it. This is the version of you who protects her energy without guilt, who walks away without hesitation, who sets boundaries that don't bend, who chooses relationships that feel nourishing, not draining, who prioritizes her mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being above everything else. The version of you who never settles again isn't harsh, she's healed. She isn't cold, she's clear. She isn't guarded, she's grounded. She isn't difficult, she just refuses to carry the weight of other people's emotional immaturity. You didn't go through everything you went through just to end up back in the same cycles. You didn't break patterns just to let someone walk in and recreate them. You didn't rebuild yourself just to hand your heart back to someone who doesn't know how to hold it. The story doesn't end with the pain, it ends with your becoming. A woman who chooses herself every time. A woman who knows her worth without waiting for permission. A woman who trusts her intuition without second-guessing. A woman who loves deeply, but never at the cost of her own spirit. A woman who knows that healing isn't pretty, but neither is staying broken. And now, you're no longer breaking, you're becoming.